and this is our plan of attack.
Banks have become an essential trait to our democracy. So consider this justice.
Thank you for listening to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com, the #1 listener-supported radio station on the internet. Please help support this station so this battle can continue forward. Revolution Radio!
Extendivite really works. Just listen to what some people have to say.
Several years ago, I was developing a very severe situation. I called it my flippy heart. It was doing not good things, and I did not want to go to a medical doctor because I just knew they would give me a cover-up pill. I didn't want to get onto that sort of thing at all. When I learned it was garlic and cayenne is a healer. It is a wonderful herb. I said, I think I'm onto something here. I'll tell you, I wouldn't be without it. It did wonderful things for me.
Extendivite is only $69.95 for a 2-month supply of either capsules or liquid. Call now. That's 1-877-928-8822 or visit heartdrop.com.
Extend your life with Extendivite.
The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and freedomslips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Welcome to Sacred Matrix, a divine paradigm of love and universal consciousness, with your host, Janet Kira Lessin and Dr. Sasha Lessin.
Together, we transform the world.
And now, here are your hosts, Janet Kira and Dr. Sasha Lessin.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Sacred Matrix on Revolution Radio at revolution.radio, and I'm your host, Janet Kira Lessin, with my co-host, Dr. Sasha. Alex Lessin, our producer, is Thomas Becker, and this is Revolution Radio, and we have two very special guests with us today, Andrew D. Basiago and Michael Macintosh. And let me tell you a little bit about each person. We're not going to go into great detail. I have a full page listed on aquarianradio.com for those who want to go and check it out. And so Andrew D. Basiago is a leading figure in the Truth Movement. And he is best known for revealing publicly his life experiences as one of America's first-time space explorers and Mars visitors. He's a lawyer, writer, public speaker, media personality, former U.S. chrononaut, and 21st century visionary. And Andy is running for president in 2024. I know it's a bit early, but now's the best time to talk about it. And we're going to talk about his involvement in DARPA's Project Pegasus and the CIA's Mars Jump Room program. And down to Michael Macintosh. He's an American musician, minister, international businessman, builder, statesman, veteran, former Obama administrator, advisor, former U.S. chrononaut, and Mars teleportation program participant, remote viewer, and extraterrestrial contactee. And he is running for the president of the United States in 2024. So we brought two of these people on today to talk a little bit about these issues and what's going on. And I wanted to bring on Dr. Sasha, Alex Lessin, before we bring on Michael and Andrew. And I'm getting a lot of feedback. How's it going on your end?
Okay, I can't quite hear you. You're kind of echoing. Can you hear me?
No,
Hello,
I'm gonna.
Everybody who ain't talking needs to mute. That's the problem.
Okay, so if you're not talking, mute. Okay, go ahead, honey.
Okay, so can you hear me now? Okay, so I find it interesting to think of the universe as from Talbot's idea of a holographic universe where the fractals of everything is in everything, and so that it's very interesting. So our guests talk about their experiences in the jump room and time travel. Let yourself feel a part of yourselves that vibrates with that kind of experience, and you can allow this confluence of experience to grow within you because you've got a fractal of Andy and Michael within you. But I would just like to say a word about because I'm trained in whether people are remembering things and how they are doing it. And so I've actually been able to experience Andy, and I can tell you, he is telling you what he saw. I have taken all the professional measures, and he's telling you what was real. I'm telling you. Okay, so that's my introduction.
Okay, so how I want to do this, and I'm getting a lot of feedback. I might sign off and sign back on again for a second here, but let me get through this first part of the show. I would like to bring on Michael. And well, first of all, I want to do a little sound check, but I want to start with Michael so he can give a little bit of his background, because most of us are familiar with Andy's background. Andy's been on our show a dozen times and been on a lot of media over the last 20 years. But Michael's kind of new to this whole field, and I'd like him to come on and give a little bit of his background for about 10 minutes. And so let me start with Michael Macintosh. Hi, Michael. First of all,
hi, Janet.
Check. You're coming in loud and clear. Good.
Right.
So give us about 5 to 10 minutes of who you are, how you got involved with extraterrestrials, and how you got into this Mars teleportation program and jump room and all that stuff.
Okay.
Okay. We'll listen for about 5 to 10 minutes. Go ahead.
Well, you're asking very, firstly, difficult things for me to remember, to be completely honest, as a lot of this started very early in my childhood. You're talking like age 5. And I come from a sort of very heavily military connected family and background. Multiple generations of military in different countries, as including the United States. But let's see. When I was 5, I was living with my parents temporarily in Western Canada. My dad was working there, and that was when I first encountered extraterrestrials, and indeed top secret government projects. Almost within a few months of each other, I encountered both. And I was heavily memory suppressed after these initial encounters and didn't fully recall them until really only a couple of years ago, when I was recovering from a car accident, and I was endeavoring to sort of delve into all of the trauma that I had experienced in my life to figure out why I was having certain recovery issues, basically. And this led me to search out all kinds of information as to what I could have experienced that led me to not be fully healing from the trauma, my life trauma after this car accident. So this is what led me to somehow stumble across the research of our other guest, Andy Basiago. And I don't know if he even recalls, but we ended up having conversations via social media and indeed on Skype. where he related to me his experiences. I was using another name at the time. I was using an alias, as I tend to online for security reasons. But and we haven't spoken in a couple of years. We were talking for a little while, like a couple of weeks, maybe a month. And he related all of his experiences to me with the Mars program and time travel. And I found it to be really interesting. And having been, over the course of my life, sort of someone who has, shall we say, explored very sort of unorthodox views of the world and the universe. I was very open-minded to the possibility, even probability, that he was telling me the truth, because I understand quite a bit by nature of my curiosity about the universe. But something more happened, and Andy talking to me actually triggered memories, what I believe to be memories. And I questioned this heavily for months. But after doing some more sort of regression therapy to figure out if this was actual memory that I was having, or if I was just creating memories, or what was actually going on, I came to the conclusion that I had actually experienced some of the same things that Andy had, and indeed been part of some of the projects that he had talked about, that he has talked about at great length. And I do remember Andy explaining to me that for some reason at that time period, a couple of years ago, 3 years ago, a lot of people who had been part of these projects were only just then beginning to wake up to the fact that they had been, because of the heavy memory suppression that was used to prevent people from recalling any of this. So I'm still kind of currently trying to access what's really in there in my memory. But I have fairly accurate memory of some experiences that were early in my childhood pertaining to extraterrestrial contact, the Mars teleportation program, and time travel. And right up to this day, I've been encountered and experienced contact with extraterrestrial beings who have, as far as I can tell, been interested in me since the time I was a child. And I believe I don't know if I'm have been selected to been part of some ultimate grand plan or project that they have in mind. But I believe that to be the case, and I believe that that will somehow eventually lead me to being president of the United States in the near future, and also Andy. So I believe you have 2 future presidents of the U.S. on the line here, Janet.
That's interesting. So tell us a little bit about your first encounter with the extraterrestrial. What kind of aliens were they? What was the circumstances? What was going on?
The first encounter was I observed a craft. I was camping in the Canadian Rockies one weekend with my parents and my sister and some friends of my parents. And I came out of my tent in the middle of the night, and just to look at the landscape and the sky, because I had never really seen anything like that before. I'm from a city. I mostly have lived in the suburbs, which is not very conducive to looking at the night sky. So I really wanted to see that, and so I went out of my tent and looked at the sky, and I just remember seeing this gigantic craft. It was literally the size of a football field, and just hovering there. 100, 200 feet above my head. And as a 5-year-old child, I just sort of stared at it and wondered, what is this thing? Is this some sort of plane or ship, something that I've never seen before? And I just didn't really, I guess as a 5-year-old, I didn't really think of it as anything unusual because I was only 5. I had nothing in my experience to compare it to. So it took off. It flew away very quickly, disappeared in almost a second. And that was my first experience with anything sort of out of the ordinary.
Hey, if we could jump to the latest contact, get any kind of message from about how you and Andy should interact and what the potential of your interaction would be?
Honey, shut off your other computer. I think you're getting feedback.
All my computers are off, Janet. All of my computers are off.
Okay.
So go ahead. Back to your question. Well, I mean, I can just sort of look at that from my own logical standpoint. And I was just reading the page that you posted there, Janet. I think it's really interesting. I'm obviously, well, I don't know if I've made this clear, but I'm obviously very much a Republican-oriented person. And Andy is obviously seeking the Democratic nomination. But we also have a very similar set of experiences. So I think it's very interesting in that we could work together very easily and work particularly to bring the country together because in case you hadn't noticed, the left and right have been at each other's throats for the last 20 years at least. And I kind of look at it as though we're in a de facto civil war, frankly. But it's just nobody's come out and said it. But I would like to see that end, and I would like to reach out to Andy right here and let him know that I don't want this back and forth tit for tat bickering and virtual warring, civil warring to continue. And if he's going to, represent the Democratic Party at some point, I would like to absolutely see that put an end to, and that would be a good place to start.
Yeah, I see sometime in the future we won't have this type of politics, and maybe when they win, it'll be one from each side. If you have a Republican president, you'll have a Democratic vice president or something. You have to work together.
And ultimately, we're all just human beings who want to see the best outcome for our country and ultimately the world and humanity. But, we have differences of opinion and different viewpoints on things and different approaches to solving problems. But, we need to put the politics really aside and put the country first and put each other first. And I would like to see more of that happening, and I don't see it happening right now with Trump. I think he's I think he's equally as divisive as the previous administrations, the previous two administrations, and I think he really needs to change his tone if he's really going to be more effective. And I hope he does, but I don't see that happening over the next,
Well, yeah. I want to get back a little bit to how you got to Mars, and then I want to go to Andy. So let's what do you remember about how you got involved with the Mars program?
That was the original involvement. I was, I guess, 6 years old, and I was in kindergarten, and I guess I was at the time identified as someone with some sort of special abilities or exceptional abilities. I was always kind of a nerd, I mean, I love to read. I could read the newspaper when I was 3 years old. I could play music by the time I was 4. I've always been a fairly natural musician. I'm good with languages. I can speak 5 or 6 languages I can get by in. And I have, what I figured out later are actually parapsychological abilities, which I didn't really think were anything unusual, but so I guess somehow I ended up on the radar of some government agencies at a very young age. And from age 6, I was asked via my kindergarten class by some men who just came into the school. Well, I didn't know who they were, but they seemed like nice people and they seemed trustworthy and like they wouldn't hurt me. So they asked me if I would help them with a project, with something, if I wanted to help. And I said, well, sure, why not? Why wouldn't I help grown-ups? I was a 6-year-old kid, and the natural inclination of a child is to want to help grown-ups. So I volunteered, basically, as a 6-year-old to go with them to this, in this car, to a warehouse that wasn't too far from my school. And then they sent me via this teleportation device to California from Calgary, Alberta, where I still was at the time. And that's
Can you
where.
tell us what did this device look like? What was it like?
Well, I don't know if you've ever shoplifted, but I have. In my teens, I got caught shoplifting, right? So when you're walking through the security devices at the store, and you have the tag that goes beep 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 when you've stolen something or didn't pay for it, it looked kind of like those things that you walk through. that set off alarms.
Thank you. But my daddy was rich. I could just buy it,
Yeah, well, good for you. I come from, poor white trash background, so I stole stuff. I'm not going to lie. I stole an Aerosmith CD, actually, when I was 14. Go Boston. Yeah, I got caught.
Okay, so how did you know you were in California? Did they tell you?
I didn't. Look, as I've said, I didn't remember any of this until, I didn't start remembering any of this until a couple of years ago. So this is all just new memories that I've acquired, and I just figured out that that's where I had been. It looked like California, it smelled like California. I think it was California. So there I was, and that was the day I met Barack Obama, and he was my sort of immediate supervisor, I guess. So I went with him.
So you were how old, and how old was Barack?
And by what name did you call him?
Well, we didn't actually use names because nobody told us. Nobody told anybody whose name was it. Nobody told me what his name was anyway. I just I'm really good with faces. I remember faces, and I can sort of put names to faces later if I can match up the information somehow. That's really easy. But so I remember the face and the personality of that person, which is, it was him.
Gotcha.
So let's see. We went up in this building that I figured out was this building in El Segundo, California. It's now, I think it's now like a video game company or something, or pretending to be a video game company. But we went up a few floors in that building, and there was a desk and some woman sitting behind the desk who I can't remember her face or anything, her name or anything. But he had to check me in or something. So he said, okay, this is him, and she was like, oh, okay. So we went in this elevator and went up, and next thing you know, I could feel like I was maybe floating momentarily, and passing through like the upper. I can almost remember seeing like passing through the upper atmosphere of the Earth, and then suddenly being like in this cavern, like an underground cavern, and I was there on what I believe was Mars with Barack Obama. And
what made you think it was Mars?
Well, what makes me think it was Mars was because later on we went out on the surface, and it wasn't Earth, I'll tell you that. There were creatures there that I've never seen on Earth anywhere.
What do they look like?
Well, there were a few different species that I had encounter with. There was what you call the gray aliens were there. There was another species there that wanted to eat us, that kind of looked like scorpions or something, like mixed with like a dinosaur. It was really, they were very hungry, and they were trying to eat us.
Big? How big are these things?
Adult human sized, probably bigger, actually. Yeah. And then there were somehow I linked up, while I was there, I linked up telepathically with Martian humanoids. Like I was able to, because while we were there, between the time that we were in the cavern and went out on the surface, there was a lot of time lapse. So I was relaxed, and I was asked to use my remote viewing ability to focus on certain coordinates on the planet and a certain time period. So I did that, and I was there to basically what I think was there to remote view the surface of Mars and to figure out what Mars had been like 1 million years ago. And
$1 million years ago. Wow.
Yeah, 1 million BC. And now that information has now been published by the CIA on their website. It's been declassified. It was transcribed in 1984. It was recorded by Obama himself, who I believe is also has parapsychological abilities and was able to kind of link up to my mind and interpret what I was visualizing. And either he recorded that or communicated it to somebody via a communications device of some sort. I'm not sure what the technology they were using was, but he was talking while he was linking up to me. So it was into something, or maybe it was a tape recorder. I don't really know, but.
So what was it like 1 million years ago? What did you see?
Yeah, what did I see? I saw that Mars had at one point an advanced civilization on it, and that some terrible cataclysm basically wiped it out. And yeah, that's what I figured out. And that information is published by the CIA on the CIA website. You can look it up yourself in Google. CIA remote viewing Mars 1981, I believe.
Okay, I'll look that up.
I've got the same information from Stuart Swerdlow and other people. Yeah. It definitely correlates with lots of other stuff that I've heard.
Yeah. Yeah, and I've questioned all of these memories that have come to me to try to figure out if I'm crazy or I'm just imagining things, if I just want this to be true or something. But I'm telling the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth to the best of my ability. So help me God. And I do believe in God. So I cannot tell a lie. You know what I'm saying? This is
how does all this affect you emotionally in your life?
It's overwhelming at times, frankly. And, it's difficult to come to terms with, especially because, like, so many people think this is insane, frankly. And, they think I'm insane probably for coming on the radio and talking about this. And but you know what? I've been thought of as crazy before in my life, so this is nothing new to me. I was crazy when 9/11 happened, and I knew what really happened like the week after. I knew the truth about 9/11 the week after it happened, and I was telling everybody already, and I was crazy then, so I'll be crazy now, I guess, for a different reason. But yeah, you know, it's also in a way I look at it as a privilege to be able to kind of be maybe one of the first people to help the rest of humanity come to the realization that our history is very different than we're taught, obviously, and there's a much greater reality to the nature of our existence than what people are led to believe, and that's really been the main purpose of my life, frankly, for the last 20 years at this point, is to help people come to realize the truth, and that's why I became a Christian minister in 2000. I teach, I help people learn, and this is what I do. And so this is just another thing to add to that list of things to help people learn about, as far as I'm concerned.
Wow. Did you ever have a face-to-face on Mars with Andy? Did you ever see him and interact with him?
Now, this is where this gets interesting, yeah, because when I was there when I was 6, I do remember 2 other people came up shortly after I had been there with Barack Obama for a little while. And one of them, I believe, was Andy, was like a 19, 20-year-old Andy. That's a face that I remember. And another one of those people was me. It was my older self. So I don't know I don't know if Andy has memories of that, but I certainly do. And if he doesn't want to talk about that, that's totally fine. I understand, but I have these memories, and I guess that's what I'm trying to communicate.
You're breaking up horribly. I don't know if it's just me. Is Michael breaking up horribly for everybody else?
No, we hear him fine. I hear him fine.
Okay, I'm gonna sign off and come right back on because I have a poor connection. Go ahead, continue. I'll be right back.
Yeah. So, Michael, have you learned anything in dreams or in theogenic journeys or further meditation? What's the expansion that you're getting now?
Yeah, well, since we started talking about this on the air, I actually have experienced more memory recall, what I believe to be memory recall, and other things which I believe might be chronovision, which is an ability that I have where I'm able to see into my own future sort of and see future events, but I get them confused as memories. So sometimes sometimes they involve time travel to the past, so they effectively are memories anyway. So it's kind of interesting, but I don't know what you mean by theogenic. So if you could elaborate on what that means.
It's psychedelic. What happens when a person takes dimethyltryptamine or lysergic acid diethylidomide, they get out of their usual operating ego and can access parts of their intellect and beyond that, spiritual levels of consciousness.
Right. Well, I suppose having taken LSD already didn't hurt being able to do that. So, I had an interesting LSD experience that I'll perhaps relate to you at some point, but a long time ago. But let's see. Memory is difficult, especially when relating to the ego, I suppose, because the ego wants to suppress it naturally in order to fit in. I
want to give Andy a chance to talk, and then we'll go back and forth asking each other questions and see if we can unravel this mystery, because we deal with people all the time that have memories that are trying to recover memories, and there's confusion, and then there's clarity, and of correlations. And so, Andy, are you there? I know you've been standing by.
Yeah, let me say that just as a matter of first principle that, you know, I've been speaking about my time travel experiences for 15 years now, and my Mars experiences for 10 years, and that it was my goal in bringing forward other Mars experiencers, and I have. I brought forward William B. Stillings, Bernard Mendez, the late William Whitecrow, and Ken Johnston Sr. So I can corroborate the accounts of Mars visitation by those four fellow astronauts. But this is, I have to acknowledge that I'm shocked. Shocked because I know this individual. He contacted me 2 or 3 years ago using a different name.
That's correct.
And what was that name, by the way, Michael? Remember what it was? I don't remember what it was because I've dealt with thousands of people.
Yeah, I have used. I had an online alias for a long time, which was Zolimon. So perhaps right. I think that's how we were in contact.
Right now, I remember when you contacted me, and I even remember discussing U.S.A. with you when many of us were investing in U.S.A.
That's correct.
Which was a German Bitcoin opportunity that folded in America and Canada. I do remember your story about being a Canadian youth who thought you may have gone to Mars at 5. But when we spoke, of course, you may have been recovering your memories. I remember now that there was no discussion of meeting myself or Barack Obama on the surface. Mm-hmm. Now, let me just basically respond to some of the things you've said.
Yeah, I hadn't gotten that far in my memory recovery yet.
First of all, I was trained with Barry Soetoro, and the individuals we've been able to identify as part of our training class were 5 of the 10 teenagers, possibly 6, and then Bernard Mendez. So when I was contacted by William Brett Stillings in spring of 2010, and then by Bernard Mendez in 2011, we were able to identify the 3 of us, as well as Barry Soetoro, who in 1983 changed his name to Barack Obama, Regina Elvira Dugan, who President Obama appointed the first female director and the 19th director of DARPA on July 20th of 2009, and the late William Cameron McCool, who died tragically on February 1st of 2003 while serving as the pilot of Space Shuttle Columbia. There was also a 6th out of 10 teenager. We think his name was Eric Schoenfeld, and that he was from San Mateo, California. But so we know who those 5 were, basically Andy, Brett, Barry, Regina, and Willie, and then Bernard Mendez, who was about 15 years older than the rest of us. We don't know who the other 5 young people who we were trained with, but we think, like I said, that one of them may have been named Eric Schoenfeld, but we've been unable to locate him. Perhaps he's deceased. Now, let me also say that, so we don't know everything about everybody who served. I do know that after we were trained in summer of 1980, and I started going to Mars via jump room in July of 1981, I went up by myself, and then in August of 1981, I went up with Courtney M. Hunt of the CIA. Know that we went up as a group of 6 or 7 people a couple times with Barack Obama, when he was still using the name Barry Soetoro. And I know that after I was paired with Courtney Hunt and William Stillings in the 81-82 time period, in 83 I was paired with Barry, as we knew him, Barry Soetoro, and Bernard Mendez. But I know to an absolute certainty that I had no contact with anybody younger than William Brett Stillings. I was born on September 18th of 1961. Barack Obama is 45 days older. He was born on August 4th of 1961. Barry Soetoro as I knew him. And then Willie McCool, for example, was born on September 23rd of 61, 5 days after me. And Regina Dugan was about a year and a half younger. She was born on March 19th of 1963. And then William Brett Stillings was born on December 22nd of 66. And when we were in training, he was the only individual, for example, who was too young to drink beer when we would have beer keg parties at night, even parties that our fathers and that Ed Dames would come to up there at College of the Siskiyous in Weed, California, where we were trained in summer of 80. And there was a real issue as to whether or not Brett should be serving. But beyond him, an individual 5 years younger than me, who was 13 when we were trained in summer of 80 and 14 when we started going up in midsummer of 81, the next summer, I had no contact not only with any children on Mars, but until my nephews began to be born and my brothers, 4 years after I left the Mars Jump Room program, my oldest nephew having been born in 1988, I didn't have contact with any children during that period of my life. I mean, I was going to UCLA, I was writing for the Daily Bruin, I was working for sociologist Ivan Light, I was studying history during the day division, I was studying advanced math during the night division, and I was periodically going over to that El Segundo building and jumping into Mars. And I think between summer of 81 and my last jump in May of 1984, I probably went up about 40 times. And, Michael, I'm absolutely certain that I had no contact with children on Mars. Now, when we couple that with the fact that you contacted me several years ago, and I'm literally shocked that it's the same person, you had told me that you had memories of possibly going up to Mars, but you didn't implicate Barack Obama and I. And now you're running for president. And I have to be honest with you that while it's possible that because we can't prove a negative, you did have contact with Obama, you certainly did not have contact with me on Mars. And I have to also kind of add to the mix here that it's my impression that for the most part you've misappropriated my material. And like I said, I wanted to bring other jumpers forward. Now, let me go to the truth of my response to your description. You just described going to Mars via jump room, and you talked about going up into the upper atmosphere. But when we were in the jump room building, we never saw the Earth, and we never saw the atmosphere. We never saw the trip to Mars. The jump room was an elevator. It was a space elevator. It was the elevator at the El Segundo building on the West Coast, and the East Coast jump room, which was in the CIA headquarters to the left or west side of the George Washington Bridge in New York City. When we were going up to Mars in those two jump rooms, we were in an aeronautical repositioning chamber. In other words, we were within a closed area that doubled or had a dual use as an elevator, for example, in the El Segundo building. We didn't see the atmosphere. We didn't see the Earth from space. We didn't even see Mars on its approach. We were in the jump room building the entire time. And you just described going up via jump room and going up into the upper atmosphere and seeing it. And I'm sorry, but that's just not what the experience consisted of. So I really think that we have to explore the possibility that as a result of contacting me several years ago, and I remember you were a nice guy, and we had a number of conversations on Skype. I remember you told me how you were a musician. You told me something about your background in America, but that you were living with your wife and child in England. So I'm really shocked. I didn't know it was you. I did not know that the individual named Michael Macintosh was the individual who contacted me a number of years ago using a different name. But I'm just saying that I really think we have to explore what you remember, because as a matter of first impression, your description of the jump room experience is not accurate. I believe that you may be suffering from a situation where you've listened to my accounts, those of Stillings, of Mendez, and White Crow and Johnston, which have now been on the Internet for 10 years, and I think you're possibly experiencing a psychological phenomenon where our experiences have, in your mind, become your experiences.
Okay, Andy, let's give Michael a chance to respond to that. Okay, so Michael, what do you think of what Andy's saying?
Well, I certainly appreciate the input, and it definitely is something to consider. It really is. And I mean, I think that if these are real memories that I'm having, they happened when I was 6 years old, the very first ones. So the exact details may not be as I'm relating them, if you can understand that. I mean, when you were 6 years old, you probably remembered things not entirely as, you probably have memories from when you were 6 that aren't entirely as they really were. And especially if they were suppressed or repressed memories, they're definitely going to be fuzzy, and there are definitely going to be fuzzy details. But I do believe the overall, I still right now, despite what you're saying, do believe that the overall account is accurate and true and really did happen. Now, I can understand if you don't remember, perhaps, or you don't. I'm not trying to implicate anybody in anything, because I do believe something else that is a detail relating to this whole experience, and that is that I actually gave permission for my 6-year-old self, to be used in this project as an older person. So this is where it gets really interesting, when you start thinking about, can we give consent for our younger selves in time travel to participate in experiences? But I suppose that's an issue for the future of time travel legislation, whenever that gets.
Let me ask a specific question.
Sure.
And let me just say in prescript, like I said, I do remember you now, and you were a heck of a nice guy, and I thought you were a brilliant musician. I listened to your music, you may recall.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, I thought it was very avant-garde and innovative, and I was impressed.
Well, thank you.
It wasn't my type of music, but I realized as a former musician myself, I think I mentioned that to you, that I'd played alto saxophone for 8 years, and I thought you had ability, and I think I remember telling you that. So I now realize who I'm dealing with. But let me just say, to sort of countervail what I just said, that I did not work exclusively with Obama or any other jumper. It was very much like college, where you might have class with your friends from the dorms, or another class in one particular class, and then see them for 5 or 6 or 10 more classes, and then see them again a year later. That's kind of what it was like. It was kind of like serving in the military, in that sense that I wasn't partnered with any particular person I was trained with, whether it was Stillings or Mendez or Sotoro or Dugan or McCool. I was never exclusively paired with any of them. So I cannot in fact discredit the possibility. I cannot deny the possibility that Obama brought you up there, but I certainly didn't, and I do not remember having contact with you.
Yeah, and I'm not saying you did. I'm not saying that it was you that was responsible for that, and that it was, in fact, Obama who brought me up there. But even then, what I'm saying is that Obama was not responsible for my being brought up there, that indeed my future self was responsible for giving permission to bring my 6-year-old self up there.
Well, you did say something interesting, and let me respond to that. You said you might have been brought up there to communicate psychically with the Martians. That's an interesting comment, Janet. Let me address that, Janet and Sasha, and Mike.
Sure.
Yeah.
Let me address that, because that's very interesting. I'm now writing my book about my Mars experiences. I've blocked out 150 chapters. I've completed my book about Pegasus. It's 300 chapters. I've now blocked out the chapters and written about 5 or 6 of the chapters for the Mars book. And I've already described to my transcriber, because I've been dealing with vision problems for a couple of years now. And by the way, I don't know if I'll be able to run for president in 2024 unless my vision is improved even more with more surgery. So that's more or less a dream right now than a goal. I just wrote the chapter in which I described the fact that one day Courtney Hunt of the CIA and I were greeted at the mouth of one of the jump rooms. There were about 7 or 8 around Mars. And we were met by one of the indigenous Martians. They're the ones with the pointy ears and the long faces and the spindly bodies. I've compared them to the appearance of the German actor Max Schrank in the classic German horror film, I believe from 1928, called Nosferatu. They had a very haunted look, not unlike, I've compared them to the Marty Feldman character Igor in the Mel Brooks film Young Frankenstein. They had a very haunted, recondite, quite frankly, a pretty ugly look, at least in the adult males, although their young females and their children were had a lot of neoteny and looked like attractive young Asians, sort of like Tibetans. But the adult males looked very sickly, to put it kindly. And so Courtney and I were greeted by this sickly adult male, Homo Martis Martis, and basically one of the indigenous Martians. And when we were walking behind him, he was walking very quickly across the terrain, away from the jump room, towards his residence, because he wanted to show us his residence. How Courtney Hunt set that up for us, I do not know, because we did not communicate with the guy. There was no language exchange between, verbal language exchange between the three of us when he picked us up to walk over to his residence and show us his residence underground. I had been told that the Homo Martis Martis would occasionally jump one of our astronauts and kill them and eat them, that they were cannibals of us, that they viewed themselves as being a different humanoid species and they could make lunch of us in the same way that the 5 or 6 predator species could possibly do as well. And as I was walking behind him, I thought, oh, great, he's going to take us to his residence and kill us and eat us. And without saying that, he looked back at me and cackled because he overheard what I had said completely psychically. I did not say a word. And yet this indigenous Martian looked back at me and stopped walking momentarily and looked at me like Marty Feldman playing Igor in Young Frankenstein and cackled, laughing at what I had just said to myself. So my point here is there was a psychic dimension to the Martian humanoids known as Homo Martis Martis. I did not encounter any psychic back and forth when I met 3 Martian astronauts of the Homo Martis Terris species, who are basically our genetic cousins on Mars, being the descendants of the Earthlings who went up there in prehistory, antiquity. But I have to be honest, because I am a servant of reality and of the truth, and I have to say that at this point I've changed my opinion because I do remember my conversations with Michael. I found him to be intelligent and credible when he told me that as a young Canadian he went to Mars. But then again, while all of us has been working to recover what happened to us, there may be some overlay of material from other claimants. That's another psychological phenomenon that we have to watch for. But I want to just say that I've modified what I thought I was going to accomplish in this interview. I thought I was going to basically be knocking Michael out of the water, and I did not realize the person I was dealing with because of his name change. But I would like to ask a couple of questions to determine whether his memories cohere with the actual experience of going. So let me just say that I'm open-minded now, much more open-minded than I was before this interview. I'm amenable to discussing this much further with Michael. I remember his intelligent, sort of laconic way of talking. I remember our conversations. And I really feel that he was just starting to remember when he contacted me 2 or 3 years ago. And it sounds like he now remembers more.
That is true. That is definitely true. I was just starting to remember because, as I said, I had been in a really bad car accident, and I was suffering all kinds of... Yeah, I'd been experiencing all kinds of trauma.
Yes, I remember discussions of that.
Yeah,
right.
And I was trying to, address that by facing, the best way to overcome something is to face it head on. But that's hard if you can't remember everything that you've encountered, and trauma can be difficult to get through if you've been injured. I don't know if you've ever experienced that, but I'm sure you have. But,
it's okay. You're gonna reroute it. The elephant of reality is grasped at 2 different places by the 2 of you. Which one has it by the balls?
Hold that thought. They can't hear what you're saying. Back in 5 minutes, and we'll have you say that again, Sasha.
Radio at freedomslips.com, and we'll be right back after this message.
Narco-syndicalist commune. We take it in turns to act as a sort of executive officer for the week. Yes. But all the decisions of that officer have to be ratified at a special bi-weekly meeting. Yes, I see. By a civil majority in the case of purely internal affairs. Be quiet. But by a 2/3 majority in the case of more... Be quiet. I order you to be quiet. Look, you stupid bastard, you've got no arms left. Yes, I have. Look! Just a flesh wound.
I don't believe I've seen such a display of courage, skill, nerve, grace, and stupidity.
I'll do you for that. Oh, what? Come here. What are you going to do, bleed on me? I'm invincible. You're a loony. The Black Knight always triumphs.
Roundtable Live, Monday through Friday, 1 a.m. till 4 a.m. Eastern Time. Bring your mind, bring your ideas, bring your voice. King Arthur had nothing on us. Here at Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com.
Enjoy your extra big-ass fries.
You didn't give me no fries. I got an empty box.
Would you like another? Extra big-ass fries.
I said I didn't get any.
Thank you. Your account has been charged. Your balance is 0. Please come back when you can afford to make a purchase.
No.
I'm sorry you're having
trouble.
Come on.
My kids are starving.
Thank you for tuning in to Revolution Radio. Here at Revolution Radio, we believe in freedom of ideas, freedom of speech, but above all, we believe in freedom of existence through self-reliance. This station is 100% listener-supported, and as a fundraising promotion, I have a kick-ass free gift for a $100 donation. 35,000 seeds. 25 years in the freezer. Long-term storable, 54 different varieties. So if food prices go crazy, the shit hits the fan, or if you just want to save tons of money every year by creating your own food like I do, grab our Seed Pack Special. Just look for the banner on the homepage at freedomslips.com. Don't be a statistic. Don't be part of the problem. Be part of the solution. We need, as humans, to start taking care of ourselves and not depending on the megacorps to provide unhealthy, nasty food. Included in this package is also a DVD with 900 survival and off-grid living documents and the offline home canning how to do everything website all on the DVD. So when you're growing all that food, you know how to can it, store it, preserve it, etc. with all these documents. So thank you for tuning in to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. I hope that you will pick up this package and start learning to be free. Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, where information never sleeps and freedom is one seed that needs to be planted.
What we do in life, it goes in eternity.
Thanks for tuning in to Revolution Radio. Here at Revolution Radio, we are listener-sponsored and commercial-free. But there still are bills to pay. In order to raise some needed funds to cover the cost, our station is offering a silver special. In the continental United States for a $60 donation, or in Alaska, Hawaii, or Canada for a $70 donation, we will send you an uncirculated 2018 1-ounce pure silver Eagle. The $70 donation, the extra 10 is to cover shipping, by the way, outside of the continental United States. When making the donation, you must put Silver Eagle promo in the notes on the donation. And thank you for tuning in to Revolution Radio at revolution.radio and freedomslips.com. Without you, there is no us. Revolution Radio, where information never sleeps.
It happens more often than we can imagine. In my case, I was sitting at home, and out of nowhere, I just started feeling uncomfortable. Then it got worse, and I started perspiring. I tried to ignore it, but I waited too long. The chest pain came as we were driving to the hospital emergency. I felt my life clock begin to tick. I barely survived. There was lots of damage done to my heart. What do I do now? I was lucky. I took a leap of faith and tried a 7-herb formula with hawthorn, garlic, cayenne, and more called Extendivite. Herbs have been used for thousands of years to keep us healthy. If you're not using Extendivite as a preventative supplement, maybe it's time to start. To order, call 1-877-928-8822 or visit heartdrop.com.
Extend your life with Extendivite.
The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and freedomslips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Aloha and welcome back to the Sacred Matrix on Revolution Radio. And I'm your host, Janet Kira Lessin, with my co-host, Dr. Sasha, Alex Lessin, producer Thomas Becker, and guests Andrew D. Basiago and Michael Macintosh. And we're connecting the dots and figuring out the riddle. But before we get back, I'd like to remind everybody to please, and somebody please mute, you're making a lot of background noise, to please go over to revolution.radio, to the donation button to make a donation, because we really need your donations. We got hacked recently. Our chats, we're trying to recover things. We're working triple overtime, and we need donations to help us keep on the air, literally. Okay. Before we went on the break, Sasha was talking, and of course the music was going, so we don't know what he said. So I'm going to pass the stick to Sasha, and then he's going to bring back Andrew and Michael. Sasha, what were you saying when the music was going?
Well, okay, if I may, to iterate again, we had reached the point where Andy did not remember any children that he saw on Mars, and as Michael and he started talking, they realized that they were just perhaps grasping the same elephant of reality, and one of them had it by the trunk and the other had it by the balls, but it was the same elephant, and that's where we got. So that we find this phenomenon on our program all the time, that people start describing their experiences and they kind of fit other people's and they resonate off, and suddenly we're getting a bigger picture, like we're putting all these puzzle pictures together, and I think it's totally fascinating.
Well, time travel is really a weird thing.
Michael mentioned arriving on Mars in a sub-basement, to grossly generalize what he said. And I remember going up to 7 or 8 different jump room receiving facilities, and all of them were underground. He also gave us a reason of why Obama would have taken him up there, which is that he was a psychically gifted child. And as I described before the break, when I went on a tour with one of the Homo Martis or indigenous Martians with Courtney M. Hunt of the CIA, who was my second Mars training officer, I said to myself, well, how do we know this guy's not going to be eating us? Because we had been told that occasionally they would eat one of our fellow astronauts for dinner, you know. And this Homo Martis looked around and cackled at me because he could hear what I had said inside my mind. So there was a psychical dimension of the experience interacting with the Martians. But I would like to ask Michael what he remembers of specific issues, if I might ask a few questions of him to see if his experiences correlate.
Yeah, speak directly to him.
To Michael.
Michael, I want to know, do you remember anything on your body before going up? Do you have any memories of anything being attached to your body?
To my body before going up? Not really. I mean, nothing clear and specific.
The reason I ask is that every jumper that I knew, every jumper Earth from the El Segundo, California, or the New York, George Washington Bridge area, we would be given a pad that was about 4 by 5 inches square, a plastic piece of fabric or kind of a plastic sheet off the back of it, and it had a sticky surface on it, and we would whop it onto the chest of one of our fellow jumpers. I even remember putting it one time on the diminutive chest of Regina Dugan, and she said, "Hurry up," because she didn't want me observing her diminutive breasts while I was helping her put on this device. And after we got the sheet off the back of it, there was a surface, and we would whop that 4 by 5 inch pad onto the chest of a fellow jumper, and that was a device that read our body temperature, our heartbeat, and our respiratory function. We called it our sticky pad. Do you remember anything being whopped onto your chest like that before being sent up?
No, I don't remember anything like that.
Because that was de rigueur. Every time before we left Earth, we had to put on our sticky pad. We would always help each other do that. The other thing I want to ask you is...
Wait. Did only one of more than in a group of people have this for the whole group? That's what it sounded like. So it would be possible that Barack had it, but not Michael.
No, Sasha. Every jumper had to install this.
Every single one of you. Gotcha.
We had to pull our shirt down, whether we're male or female, or pull it up, and a fellow jumper would pull the adhesive strip off the back of the pad, and then we would slap it onto somebody else's chest so it would stick there. We called them our sticky pads, and they were monitoring our body temperature, our heartbeat, and our respiration when we were on the surface. So I was wondering if Michael was outfitted by that, because even if he was 6 years old, they would have put it on him to monitor his basic biomedical status while he was on the surface.
You know, the way we would get that in hypnosis, Michael, is we would let your chest, where the thing would have been slapped upon you, tingle and talk and really go into the chest and let your chest tell if it has any, explore those memories. That's a great hint.
Well, I don't remember that. I mean, that's all I'm saying, but I can't say for sure that it didn't happen. That's also what I'm saying, because I don't. I mean, like I've been saying, these are memories of things that I believe happened to me when I was 6 years old. I'm going to be 45 in next month. So, and for most of my life, this was memory suppressed. Like I literally could not remember this for, 39 years, 36 years, something like that.
Now is the time for you to remember more. As you talk to Andy and us, you will remember more and more easily, and you'll be able to integrate it into your life easily.
Mm-hmm. And I'm being honest when I say I'm nervous about being on the air, so it's difficult for me to kind of regress into a state where I could actually remember accurately anyway. I sort of have to be in a very relaxed environment and focus. I usually play some, high frequency recordings to help me meditate better. And I'm sure if I do that, I could probably figure out what actually happened there more accurately, if anything.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
If I might ask another question, Michael, who asked you to go?
Who asked me? I didn't get their name. It was there was a group of people that came into the school that I was attending the kindergarten class in. It was Forest Lawns High School in Calgary, Alberta, which had a kindergarten class in it for some reason. And they came in, they asked my teacher, a couple of them came to the classroom door, talked to the teacher for a minute. They looked at me, and the teacher asked me to come with her and go with those two guys. Then they took me in an office. I remember this very clearly, with another guy who had a clipboard and a checklist, and they asked me some questions. Check. Everything seemed okay. And one thing I remember very clearly is they asked me if I was Irish, which I am. Technically I'm Irish because my mom is from Dublin, and I found that to be very interesting. And I think that has something to do with the perhaps like genetic predisposition towards certain parapsychological abilities that people of my DNA would have. But thinking about it later, that's what I think it had to do with. But so everything to them was okay. I didn't get any of their names. I don't remember any of their names. I barely remember their faces, which is sad now. I wish I could. But, they
actually, it's very interesting. Very, very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
What I've is that the 7 Indo-European root races that were identified by Ignatius Donnelly, the American congressman of now about 150 years ago, or almost 150 years ago, who wrote the book Atlantis, the Antediluvian World. It looks like the Celtic, Germanic, Slavic, Italic, Greek, Persian, and Indian root races were the ones in the human population that had some Martian admixture genetically. And in our training, and in my jumps, Ina Elvira Dugan, I believe, was Irish on both sides, and I'm part Irish on my mother's side. Very little, but Germanic and Slavic and, Italic and so forth. So it's possible they asked Michael whether he was Irish or not to see if he was Celtic, and hence had some Martian admixture going way back. and his human ancestry.
Right.
That's another possibility.
The long-head Atlanteans preceded the roundheads that came up all over the British Isles and all over Western and Northern Europe, and the chronicles that we see is that it was the Atlanteans did indeed occupy Mars too. It's everything you're saying seems so consistently correct.
In fact, at the time, I didn't even know I was part Irish, but certainly I well knew that I was of Slavic, Germanic, and Italic ancestry, and that would be another 3 more of the root races that Donnelly identified that we can correlate with Martian ancestry, believe it or not. Mm-hmm. In fact, they were the populations with the green-eyed, red-haired phenotype, and what do you know? That was possessed by Regina Dugan in spades. She had extremely brilliant green eyes and red hair.
That's what I have. Red hair and greenish, brownish eyes.
So that's a ding. I mean, that's a correlation. Mm-hmm. Let me ask you, did you receive any kind of training before being sent up?
Nothing formal. No. I mean, I had informal training because of my family, but nothing in a classroom or facility or anything like that.
Do you remember any experience with anything that was done to allow you to protect yourself from predators? Do you remember any kind of training to avoid predators?
I do remember what when we were out on the surface, I do remember what happened. That was, I got really angry as a 6-year-old, and I started to get mad. I'm like, what am I doing here? You know, that's what I shouted that to the person who was right next to me, which was Obama, as far as I remember. And that's when he said to the other people, we got to get him out of here. And that's when we went back. And there were creatures there. The other 2 people that were there were using weapons to shoot at the creatures. I believe they were like laser type weapons, which I've never seen in real life other than in this memory that I'm having.
Photo guns, and I was one of them, although I only shot my gun once at a rock, and a fresh out of water jumped up out of a spring-like watery
So this is all very interesting. I wonder if it's possible that somehow time travel is involved in all of this, and that you possibly don't remember these things because it hasn't yet happened to you in your timeline. Does that make any sense?
No, but I don't discount the possibility that Barry Soetoro, who we now know as Barack Obama, may have taken you up there because, like I said, I mean, I went up a couple times in groups of 6 or 7 or 8 with Obama, and then much later in the game for me, I was paired with Obama and Mendez in a threesome, just as I had been paired with Courtney Hunt and William Stillings in a threesome of Mars astronauts.
Okay. I do have a question if I could ask. I have a question if I could ask you, perhaps. If you
sure.
don't mind.
There were a number of times when I saw him coming in from the far horizon, so he may have dropped you off at another jump room for all I know. I mean, I'm not discounting your claims. In fact, reformatted my thinking about the possibility that, in fact, you were up there. But I'm saying that I did run into Obama a few times just in one-off, him coming into a specific jump room. So if he had taken you up in a different jump room, he could have dropped you off in that jump room and then walked over to the one that I was at, just because he was told to, or because he wanted to take a different jump room home or something like that. It's possible. Because, in other words, there were times in which Obama and I crossed paths on the surface, and I didn't even know what he was doing, because I had been trained with him, but we were only partnered on several jumps.
Right.
For Mendez.
Do you remember clearly what Courtney Hunt looks like?
Yes, Courtney looked very much like the picture of Mike Roman that picture in the famous picture from the Ambassador Hotel when Senator Robert F. Kennedy was shot there on June 5th of 1968, that for many years they believed was a CIA agent, and there was an Irish BBC correspondent, Shane O'Sullivan, who was trying to establish that it was Gordon Campbell of the CIA and that his friend was George Joannides, and then it was established that it was Michael Roman, the president of the Bulova Watch Company. And Courtney was virtually identical to Mike Roman in that picture from the Ambassador Hotel.
Do you have a picture
of
him?
Two CIA agents, but then they were positively identified as his colleague.
Do you have a picture of Michael Roman that we could see, Andy?
Well,
where have
here's
you seen
another
picture? Go ahead.
I'm sure anybody could find it online. It was a famous piece that Shane O'Sullivan of the BBC did, trying to establish that the man on the left, the taller man, was Gordon Campbell of the CIA, and it proved to be Michael D. Roman of the Bulova Watch Company. That's the closest that I've been able to find any picture that closely resembles what Courtney Hunt looked like. He looked a little bit like Hunter S. Thompson, a little bit like Richard Helms, CIA, sort of Irish, Scottish huntsman look. You know.
Is it? See,
okay,
this is well. If you take a look at what I look like and imagine if I were maybe 20 years older with my hair gone, could that possibly be Courtney Hunt?
No, I remember your picture from Skype, and I wouldn't say that you resembled Courtney.
Okay.
Courtney, I would say that the celebrity that closest resembled him, I would say, would probably be Dr. Hunter S. Thompson, the late great gonzo journalist. But the picture of Michael Roman, Ambassador Hotel, the night that Bobby Kennedy was shot there, comes very close to what Courtney looked like at age 51 when I first went up with him in 1981. That's the best I can do because I tried to stay in touch with his kids, but they kind of did not want to be in contact with their dad's colleagues. They knew he was a CIA agent, and they wouldn't cooperate with giving me a photograph of him. I don't even really have a Stillings father. I mean, I've published good photographs of my own father, who went up once in that May 1984 jump. But Courtney and I went up a lot. He's going to play a major role in my book. I mean, we went up, I would say at least half the times I went up with Hunt. Both during the day and at nighttime.
Wow.
Now, let me ask you this. Do you remember when you were taken up there, remember any celebrities or VIPs being mentioned? Because there were some pretty distinguished Americans.
Wait. Can we just go back to this Courtney Hunt thing?
Sure.
Michael, did you imply that you thought you might be a time traveler and that you were Courtney Hunt? Is that what you were implying or not?
Well, it's a theory, I suppose, at this point, that indeed Courtney Hunt was a time traveler from the future, and that at this point he is me. I know that sounds...
Michael, tell me about your fingers. Are your fingers all normal in their morphology? Are there any anomalies in your...
Just a scar. That's it.
Well, Courtney had a right index finger that had a bulbous end to it. It was long. The finger was longer and had a round bulbous end to it that was quite abnormal. I don't know how he injured it.
Now, and another theory that I have is that perhaps with the use of and the aid of advanced technology, perhaps acquired from extraterrestrials, that a person could easily appear to be someone else, present themselves as another person.
Or looking at it using a devil's advocate, is it possible that you've so identified with my story that you've even conjectured that you are Courtney Hunt? Because I knew Courtney from 1981 to 2001, and I knew him around the time he passed away, around 2005, and there were some anomalies about him traveling in time in the sense that he told me he was born in 1937, and yet when I met him in 1981, he was already 51, indicating that somehow he picked up 7 extra years. But, of course, my father picked up 8 extra years in quantum displacement, and I picked up about an extra year in Pegasus. So Courtney was, by the way, Courtney was, in addition to my father and I and Ed Dames and William Whitecrow, Courtney Hunt was one of the few individuals who was both on Project Pegasus and then on the Mars Jump Room program. But I knew Courtney, I met Courtney when I was a kid on Pegasus. He actually...
You were about 6, right? It was like 1966?
No, I started in Pegasus in 1967, 68 when I was 6, because I was born in September of 61. But when I was about 10, I was sent back by my father from New Mexico via teleportation to tell them that the adults in the program could not jump home via teleportation. They were being knocked back into the lab, but kids could get through because they were small enough to get through. So somehow the teleporter was malfunctioning, and that somebody had already
you met Courtney in the mid '60s. Is that correct, or initially?
Well, Courtney, that was around 70, 71. Courtney actually took me inside and didn't listen to me when I got to Curtis Wright, and he put me in the chair in which I was, I had a halo placed over my head, and I was electromagnetically shocked to forget that I had just teleported home from New Mexico.
Right.
So that was Courtney in his 30s, and then he appeared 10 years later, 30s or 40s, I should say. Then he appeared 10 years later in 1981 when he was made my second Mars training officer after Ed Dames, and he was born in 37, but it was as if he had been born in 30 because it was 1981 and he was 51. And he and his wife told me that. So Courtney Hunt certainly time traveled, but I think the assertion that you're Courtney from the future is a little bit of a stretch.
Well, I'm not asserting anything. I'm just, I suppose, speculating and theorizing at this point.
The classic, I've described him as the classic cigarette-smoking man from the CIA, maybe the inspiration for the one on X-Files. He was a smoker and very thin and very intelligent, somewhat cynical. He had a kind of a perverse sense of humor. But it was ultimately...
sounds like my kind of guy.
Who was protecting those of us as best as they could, just as I was. In fact, Courtney and I had the discussion whether or not we were going to shoot one of our fellow jumpers when he got onto the surface and was mentally discombobulated and threatening to other jumpers. We were supposed to basically terminate his life at that point. And it was Hunt and I who decided that we wouldn't. We walked that jumper back to one of the jump rooms and pushed him in and told the technician to send him home. And he was rehabilitated and then rejoined the program. So Hunt was ultimately a good guy, although he was kind of a scary guy as sort of the cigarette-smoking guy from the CIA. But I think the possibility that you're him from the future or something is a bit of a stretch. Because I knew him and his wife. No. Times. Lived in Chatsworth, where I did.
I'm talking about Michael.
I don't smoke, but I could start. I don't smoke, but I could start. If this all ends up being what I think it is, then I'm certainly going to start smoking. I'm telling you that.
Well, Hunt lived in Chatsworth, California, where my family lived when I was going up to Mars.
Yeah.
And it was years later when I correlated that he was the guy that I had met in Pegasus. And then he confirmed it when I called him, and he laughed that I had remembered the whole thing. So I knew Courtney and his wife, Linda. I believe she left him before he passed away. And I was in communication with him up to the end of his life, up to around 2005. For a good 25 years after he was my my comrade on Mars a number of times. And actually,
anyway, the one thing that I want to know is when he gave you that thing on your head, was it pain? Did he inflict pain on you with that thing?
Well, it wasn't Hunt. It was Ed Dames who was, and in fact, Dames, again, another individual who served on Pegasus, who then served in the jump room program. He was always telling me things, even when I was a kid working with him. And I remember that Ed Dames told us, before he put the device on my head in El Segundo, that it was the American reverse-engineered version of the Soviet LIDA machine. That's L-I-D-A. What the LIDA machine was, as developed by the Soviets, is the device that makes a bunch of racket in your head. Basically, it sounds like listening to 10 hard rock songs at the same time. And while you're listening to it, you're told to forget what you're thinking about. And he described how, and essentially had us with that every time we would return to El Segundo. So that's what was used to create this decades of forgetfulness by the Mars jumpers. We figured that out. It was the use of this electronic dissolution of the brain, electronic dissolution of memory device that the U.S. intelligence community had reverse engineered from a Soviet device. I remember Dames telling me that.
Wow. Thank you.
But Hunt was more or less a trainer and then a jumper, and he was really involved. And it was my impression he had gone up there much earlier. And by the way, when I would take a telecommunications disc up there about 10 years before the so-called floppy disks, which are the 3 1/4-inch rigid disks, computer disks, about 10 years before it came out in the commercial sector in this country, before going pretty much in the 83, 84 time frame, I would go over to a printing contractor over in Santa Monica and then drive over to El Segundo and jump up to the jump room that we called the corkscrew because of its conch shape. And I would then walk about a mile across the surface through this dilapidated brick city. That's where I would frequently see either the women or the children of the Homo Martis looking out at me from behind windows and doors inside those buildings in that dilapidated brick city. And I would then give that to a telecommunications expert on the surface. And that's one thing I wanted to ask Michael. When you were up there as a child, did you have contact with anybody that you were transmitting information to?
No, the only person that I had any sort of interaction with, and it wasn't even verbal communication, was Barack Obama.
Well,
it was just...
He did have an unusual... He was from a CIA family. His mother and his grandmother and grandfather were CIA. Mm-hmm. And he is not either American-born or Kenyan-born. He was born in Indonesia. And he was still using the name Barry Soetoro. I asked him his name. Mm-hmm. And he was not yet using the name Barack Obama. I didn't learn his name Barack Obama until I ran into him in Los Angeles in a completely different context in summer of '83. In terms of your memories of interacting with Obama in the Mars Jump Room program. If he was still jumping to Mars, he would have been using the name Barry Soetoro. Do you remember him being called Barry?
I don't remember any names at all being used by anybody, actually.
Well, there wasn't a lot of that, really.
Yeah. I think that I get the impression, though, that Barry Obama had been informed that the young boy, a.k.a. me, that he had in his company was somehow was going to grow up to be the president, Michael Macintosh. This is what I've...
Yeah, I want to cover that.
Mm-hmm.
If I might jump in.
I want to cover that. We've got about half an hour left.
Well, here's the thing. I do believe that we're both going to end up being president. Still.
Well, Michael, one interesting thing you said is, of course, that you were an American growing up in Canada, And I would be remiss if I didn't share everything I know, or corroborate, rather, your experiences. And that is, Courtney Hunt made a number of references to the Canadian connection. And I've never mentioned that.
Well, we know for a fact that, the U.S., Canadian, British, Australian, New Zealand militaries all work in conjunction and have for a long time.
Good.
And anybody with
network,
the Five Eyes and our intelligence communities all cooperate generally.
In the time there, from 81 to 84, when I was going up to Mars, he made several veiled references to the Canadian connection, and I have never shared that with anybody. I don't even think I mentioned that to you when you called me 3 years ago or so, or 2 years ago, told me about the fact that you were an American child growing up in Canada when you went to Mars.
Yeah.
But I've been holding that back, and I must acknowledge that Hunt did use that term, and he never explained it to me. And it could have just been a reference, as you say, to the U.K.-U.S.A. network, but I think it was something more specific to the Mars Jump Room program. Maybe it was the fact they were utilizing Indian children.
Yeah, or there is, there are teleportation rooms in Canada as well that are being used by the American government in cooperation and with the full permission, probably, of the Canadian government. I mean, it's not really much of a secret that the CIA does operate in Canada and has permission to do that, has had permission to do that for a long time. Homeland Security, U.S. Homeland Security is, for instance, covers all of North America, not just the United States. So there's always been collaboration and cooperation between, especially Canada and the U.S., because it's we share a border, so it's there's mutual interest, mutual security issues, mutual military pursuits, and the same goes for the UK, Australia, New Zealand, other countries, especially in Europe.
Michael, how did you find the air up there?
If I recall correctly, which you have me doubting whether I'm recalling correctly, and I'll be completely honest. So I appreciate you encouraging skeptical thinking in this, because this is how we're going to get to the bottom of things and figure out what the truth really is. That's what I love about the 60s generation. You guys are a bit more skeptical than I am. I'm a naive millennial, But I found the air to be, I guess, sort of, if I recall, sort of moist, a bit heavy, but not unbreathable.
Was it difficult to breathe there?
Was it difficult? Not to me. I mean, it was, what I noticed most was the gravity and how much easier.
How far could you bound with a single normal stride?
I didn't try to do that, but what I do recall is trying to lift, push my arms up into the air, and it just sort of feeling like I was much, much stronger than I was down here on Earth. So I guess that would relate to the gravity difference somehow.
Were you given a breathing apparatus before going up?
No, none. I remember there being a blue sky, no clouds.
What year were you born, Mike?
1974.
Born in 74.
Yeah, end of 74. So I'm a 75 model. Think of it like a car. But.
So let me see if I have my math right here. So you were about 8 when we started going up in 81, right? In summer of 81?
I would have been I would have been, let's see, 75, 76, 77, 78, 79, 80. I would have been 6.
You would have been 6 in 81?
Yeah, about to turn 7 in August of 81. Right.
Well, I must say that your description of the atmosphere is quite accurate.
Mm-hmm.
The 7 or 8 jump rooms that I arrived at there in the equatorial region of Mars, and the air was frequently moist and heavy, and somewhat hot. Certainly during the day when we were going up there, it would cool off tremendously. At night, that's where we were leaving. And there was a slight lifting sensation because Mars is smaller than Earth by about 40% the size of Earth. Now, we should have been able to stride about 7.5 feet with each 3-foot normal male stride, and one of the mysteries is we could only stride about 4 feet. So presumably a child would have had the same offset. In other words, if you could stride 2 feet, let's say, as a child, you should have been able to stride maybe 2.5 feet as a child.
Yeah.
We should have been able to stride much further, and the theory is the Earth and Mars are relatively hollow, so that the 40% size of Mars does not matter and did not confer a 3x capacity to stride. We could only stride about an extra foot. So as adult males, we could take or young adult males in my case, we could take about a 4-foot stride. But I do remember that sensation in the arms. We did feel a little bit stronger or a little bit more capable with our physical movements because the differential on Mars allowed it.
Yeah, that's a clear memory I have as well.
Consistent.
The taste of iron, the moisture in the air, a blue sky. I mean, I remember a very clear blue sky with no clouds. I remember...
Excuse me, guys. We're running out of time here, and I want to interject things about the future president and how you believe that you're both have been selected as future president. So, Michael, what makes you think that, I put it on the site, you have all these future presidents. Where do you get that information? And you have on your timeline that Andy's one. So, explain that to us, please.
Time travel. And I've talked about this before with you where when I talked about when I was 5.
We have new people, so we have new people. So and Andy's not heard it. So start fresh. Okay.
Well, when I talked about it before, when I was 5, I encountered extraterrestrials, and they took me on a fantastic time space travel journey, and I got to visit our current future and look at the historic record. And after piecing it all together, I believe that I know who the next several presidents are. And Andy is definitely one of them. And so am I. I don't want to be president of the United States. I don't want the job, but I mean, if it will help the country and help pave the way in some way for what Andy and other people envision for the future of America, I will absolutely jump at doing the job, because I love everything that Andy is saying, and I want to see it happen. Frankly.
So what do you know what happens to bring this about? Because you're totally unknown except for a couple of radio shows. And we know that Andy's been talking about this for quite a while.
He has.
So give us a...
Well, I think that just given the position that I've found myself in, which is, I mean, I know you guys have never heard of me, but I'm in a very successful music group. We're a multi-platinum selling band. And I think from that standpoint, I actually do have a very large audience and a very large support base. I am more sort of closely aligned with the I suppose, Republican side of the political aisle. But ultimately, I consider myself like more of a rational centrist, really. And I don't know, I just see that if that is going to happen for me, it's going to happen sooner rather than later. And if it's going to happen for Andy, it's going to happen after certain sort of geopolitical issues and socio-political issues have already been cleared up, so that he can just jump right into what he wants to get done rather than have to clean up other messes first that are really in the way of what he wants to get done. And
what is that? What are the issues that have to be cleared up?
Well, I mean, I'm sure you can understand that there are huge security issues relating to the declassification and making public of not just time travel, but teleportation, especially teleportation, because we can't really put teleportation stations all over the planet if we're going to have terrorists who are going to want to teleport bombs here, there, and everywhere and hurt people. We have to understand what we're really dealing with, and that is the fact that we have to proactively engage in the prevention of this type of thing happening before we can make these things publicly available. I don't think it's unsafe to disclose their existence to people, but I think it's unsafe right now and for some time to come to make them publicly available until we can really solve the issue, especially relating to terrorism. And that's what I believe my area of expertise is security and geopolitical matters, getting together with people from different countries and working together to solve our mutual problems that we share at international that different countries share, and that international bodies such as the United Nations would like to see resolved. I really believe that I could be very effective in reducing or even completely eliminating the threat of terrorism before we make this stuff public. And I believe that will be Andy's job.
Sorry, I was on mute. And so Andy will be doing the second part. Andy, how do you know that you're going to be president of the United States? What was your source of information?
Well, first of all, in a multiverse in which if the number of timelines was reduced to 12 Times New Roman, the number itself would stretch for 130 million miles. I don't know that I'm going to be president. What I do know is that when I was serving in Project Pegasus as a child, going back now to the late 60s and early 1970s, when it was detected that I was going to be the primary whistleblower about Project Pegasus, my father and I were traveling each in the second half of summer of 1971 down to a amphitheater at the Sandia National Labs, adjacent to the Kirtland Air Force Base, northeast of Albuquerque, New Mexico, and we were pulling up scenes from my future. And in that experience, as a 9-year-old in summer of 71, I was shown pictures of my presidency. I was shown pictures of my inaugural speech on the steps of the Capitol and giving White House talks in the East Room, the Rose Garden, etc., like any other president. And then 10 years later, when I was in training for the Mars Jump Room program at College of the Siskiyous in Weed, California, one day William Stillings looked up at Barry Soetoro, who we now know as Barack Obama, who got up to ask a question of Ed Dames during our break between lectures. And Brett Stillings' father, and Brett has already gone on the record remembering this, Brett's father said to Brett, what do you think, or how do you like being in a Mars program like this with a future president? And Tom Stillings nodded at the back of Barry Soetoro, Barack Obama. And before Brett could answer, my father, who was sitting next to us, thrust two fingers into the aisle between my father and my seat and the seats of Brett Stillings and his father, Tom, and looking at me with his eye twitching, said, 2 future presidents. And then later during our Mars Jump Room training program, during August, September of 1980, at College of the Siskiyous, my father and I drove Barry Soetoro from Weed, California, where College of the Siskiyous is, up to the Hoopa Indian Reservation Airport, which is a small regional airport. So he could take a Cessna, actually, very small plane, to the Portland International Airport, so he could then fly to Hawaii to visit his grandparents on Oahu in Hawaii. That would be Stanley Ann Dunham's parents, Stanley Armour Dunham and Madeline Dunham. And when we were driving back, I noticed that when we were driving up there, my dad was being very cautious behind the wheel. And so when we were driving back, I said, Dad, is it really true that I become president someday? And he said, yeah. And I said, really? And he goes, yeah. He said, Barry becomes president in his late 40s, and he said, you become president in your 60s. You may recall that when I ran in 2016, acknowledged that I did not believe I had a chance of winning. I was just learning the ropes. So I'm not asserting that I know I'm going to be president. What I've asserted that one or more timeline, it was quantum access done on one or more major timelines. I was a future president. I don't discount the possibility that Michael may be one as well. I certainly wish him luck. But I'm not asserting that I have to be president or will be president. What I've shared with, just as I shared, for example, the chronovisor images of the flooding of the Supreme Court building in Washington, D.C., what I'm sharing is information that I know quantum accessed by the U.S. intelligence community as a result of DARPA's Project Pegasus, which my father and I served on. So in a similar vein, for example, I've described how we had lunch with both Bushes, and George W. Bush, who was then about 24, 25 years old, was going all over that restaurant in New Mexico going, have you heard my daddy and I are going to be president? And then later, we had lunch with a young Bill Clinton who was sitting right next to me when his presidency was discussed. And they said, Bill, how are you doing with the information? So what I've shared is the fact that I saw my presidency and I was told about it 10 years later, and that of the future presidents in the last 25, 30 years, I and my father and other people with ties to the U.S. intelligence community knew who George W. Bush, George H.W. Bush, Bill Clinton, and Barack Obama were, because the U.S. government has been quantum accessing the future and identifying future presidents. So I don't really discount the possibility that Michael may be one of them. I don't know. I don't know what anybody's, one of the amazing things in my life is I've known people who have done exceptional things, and you never would have known it at the time. I mean, I went to high school, for example, with, Kevin Spacey, Mayor Winningham, and Val Kilmer. And sure, they were into acting, but we didn't know they were going to become superstars, in Hollywood. And I've had other friends who have done remarkable things. I mean, if you had asked me a couple of years before I did Coast to Coast AM whether I'd become a media personality, I would have probably said no. I was practicing law. So I'm really, I cannot judge what Michael is saying. I mean, anybody potentially could become president. Who am I to say who it's going to be? I'm just sharing the fact that on one or more timelines, my presidency was quantum access. Whether it now will not occur because of my recent problems with my vision, that could be disqualifying. I don't want to be a visually challenged U.S. president. So maybe it's a matter of the fact that on 15 out of 20 major timelines, they saw my presidency, and that's what we looked at, and that's what my dad was briefed on before he told me in 1980 that Barry and I were future presidents. And Obama did reach the presidency, but maybe I won't because of my vision. I don't know. But I've just shared the fact that this was something discussed with me at around age 10 and again around age 18 when I then transitioned from a normal life into working for the government again. The point is, and the reason I've shared it more than any vainglory about becoming president myself, is I want the American people to know that the U.S. intelligence community, the U.S. government in its inner sanctum, has been operating on a nonlinear basis. That's why CIA agents are so cagey about not saying something that might be overheard by somebody else. Or when you meet them and you talk to them, they're so guarded about what they say. Because the empirical
Hey, guys,
basis...
we have 1 minute when we're off the air, so I want everybody to have a chance to say goodbye and final words. We're going to have the music in like 30 seconds.
And Basiago for president.
On the day after disclosure, they'll be saying, you know what? Basiago and Macintosh were right.
Well, and it's like the Beatles records. There's clues everywhere. It's like the Paul is dead clues. There are clues everywhere.
There are clues everywhere.
They'll look back on it and go, oh, duh.
Yeah, well, like 300 song clues.
Well, thank you both for coming on the air. Thank you, Mad Painter Thomas Becker. Thank you, Sasha, Allie Clinton. Thank you, listeners. Love and blessings. Aloha.
Radio at freedomslips.com, and we'll be right back after this message.
Ladies and gentlemen, can I please have your attention? I've just been handed an urgent news story, and I need all of you to stop what you're doing and listen.
On the go? Still want to listen? Don't have one of those fancy phones with too many buttons. Don't know what an app is? Or you don't even care? Well, we got you here at Revolution Radio. Now you can dial in 24/7 to listen to our shows. We have a number for Studio A and Studio B, and best of all, it's free. Don't forget, your carrier charges for your cell phone provider may apply, though, so check with your cell provider to make sure. So ready? Here you go. Get a pen. Here's the number. Studio A is 712-432-6958, and Studio B is 716-748-0112. Thank you very much for listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, the #1 listener-supported radio station in the world.
Hey everyone, it's Barbara Jean Lindsay, the Cosmic Oracle. If you have questions about your past lives or future plans, need answers from the cosmos about your love life or career, or just want to keep your finger on the pulse of the planet, check out my show, The Cosmic Oracle, here on Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com.
Thanks for tuning in to Revolution Radio. Here at Revolution Radio, we are listener-sponsored and commercial-free. But there still are bills to pay. In order to raise some needed funds to cover the cost, our station is offering a silver special. In the continental United States for a $60 donation, or in Alaska, Hawaii, or Canada for a $70 donation, we will send you an uncirculated 2018 1-ounce pure silver Eagle. The $70 donation, the extra 10 is to cover shipping, by the way, outside of the continental United States. When making the donation, you must put Silver Eagle promo in the notes on the donation. And thank you for tuning in to Revolution Radio at revolution.radio and freedomslips.com. Without you, there is no us. Revolution Radio, where information never sleeps.
Looking for a nightcap to fill your listening needs? Come join us on Spaced Out Radio with me, Dave Scott, right here on Revolution Radio. Monday through Friday for 3 hours a night, starting at 9 p.m. Pacific, midnight Eastern, we will take you down the supernatural path. From E.T. contact to the paranormal and all of the spiritual, cryptid, and conspiracy stories in between. You can find us right here on Revolution Radio, at spacedoutradio.com, on Twitter